Imagine the world is ending. Not a movie ending, but a real geological apocalypse. The air turns to poison, the oceans boil, and the sky goes black for 1,000 years. Statistically, surviving this is impossible. Surviving 5 of them insults the laws of probability. But one animal didn't just survive the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, or the volcanoes that melted the Permian. It barely noticed them. It isn't an apex predator, and it doesn't have armor. In fact, you probably stepped on the toughest creature in Earth's history this morning without even realizing it. Imagine for a second that you are standing on a beach about 445 million years ago. The air is breathable, but it's getting cold. Really cold. You're witnessing the start of the Ordovician Silurian extinction, the first of the legendary Big Five apocalypses that have reset life on Earth. Most things alive right now are about to die. In fact, statistically speaking, you, me, and almost everything in the ocean are doomed. Surviving one of these events is like winning the lottery while being struck by lightning. Surviving all 5? That shouldn't be possible. But geology had other plans. While trilobites were panic spiraling and ancient nautiloids were freezing to death, one tiny 8-legged biological tank was just getting started. Enter the tardigrade, or, as you probably know it, the water bear. If you looked at one under a microscope today, it looks like a gummy bear in a hazmat suit. But don't let the cute nickname fool you. This thing is the ultimate survivalist. While 85% of all marine species were being wiped out by a sudden ice age that locked up the world's water, the tardigrade lineage didn't just survive, it barely seemed to notice. Scientists and paleontologists still argue passionately about whether the exact modern tardigrade was waddling around back then, or if it was their slightly larger ancestral cousins, the Lobopodians. But the lineage was there, lurking in the moss and the mud. Here's the thing though, you usually assume survival of the fittest means being the biggest, baddest predator on the block. We like to think T-Rex or the Megalodon were the pinnacles of evolution. But in the Ordovician, being big was a death sentence. It was the microscopic weirdos who inherited the Earth, simply because they didn't need much to keep the lights on. The world froze over, turning the ocean into a slushy, and the water bear just put on a sweater and waited for things to warm up. Fast forward about 70 million years. We land in the late Devonian period. The good news? Fish have jaws now, and some of them are the size of school buses. The bad news? The plants on land are actually ruining everything. It sounds like sci-fi, but the fossil record disagrees with the idea that trees are always the good guys. When huge forests first evolved, their roots broke up rocks and dumped massive amounts of nutrients into the ocean. This caused gigantic algal blooms that sucked all the oxygen out of the water. If you were a fish, you suffocated. If you were a tardigrade, you just stopped. This is where we see the first glimpse of their superpower. When oxygen levels tanked, the water bear didn't gasp for air. It likely entered a state of low metabolic suspension. It's like putting your laptop to sleep when the battery hits 1%, just waiting for a charger to appear. But if the Devonian was a bad Tuesday, the end of the Permian was the apocalypse. They call it the Great Dying, and they aren't being dramatic. About 252 million years ago, massive volcanoes in Siberia erupted for millions of years. Imagine a lava fountain covering an area the size of the United States. The air turned into poison gas, acid rain dissolved shells, and global temperatures skyrocketed. The ocean reached 104 degrees Fahrenheit, basically a hot tub. Nature effectively hit the reset button. 96% of all marine life vanished. The trilobites? Gone. The giant sea scorpions? Toast. So, how did a microscopic gummy bear survive a world that was literally melting? Now for the part nobody expects. We tend to think of tough animals as having thick skin or heavy shields. But the tardigrade survived the Great Dying by doing something totally counterintuitive. It essentially died first. When the heat cranked up and the water evaporated, the tardigrade didn't try to find a cool rock. It curled into a ball called a ton. It squeezed almost all the water out of its body, dropping from 85% water to about 3%, and replaced that liquid with a special sugar called trehalose. This sugar acts like a biological glass, freezing the animal cells in place so they don't get damaged by the heat or dehydration. It's not hibernation. In hibernation, your heart slows down. In the ton state, the tardigrade's metabolism drops to 0.01% of normal. For all intents and purposes, it is a lifeless speck of dust. It can stay like that for decades. Scholarly debates still rage over exactly which strain of ancient tardigrade pulled this off first. Some evolutionary biologists argue that this ton ability evolved specifically in response to the Permian heat, while others think it was an accidental adaptation for living in shallow puddles that dried up daily. Regardless of why they had the gear, it worked. While the ancestors of mammals were scratching a living out of the ashes, and giant reptiles were choking on ash, the tardigrade was just a dried-up speck, rolling around the wasteland, waiting for the rain to return. And when it finally did, millions of years later, they just rehydrated, stretched their legs, and went back to eating moss like nothing happened. Let's rewind the clock for a second and look at the world after the Great Dying. The planet is healing. The Triassic period rolls into the Jurassic, and we get the stars of the show, the dinosaurs. This is the era of Brachiosaurus, Stegosaurus, and eventually the T-Rex. It's the time of giants. But geology had other plans. Again. First, we had the Triassic-Jurassic extinction. Volcanoes, yes, again, split the supercontinent Pangaea apart, creating the Atlantic Ocean and spewing lava that paved over millions of square miles. Roughly half of all species died. The tardigrades? They were probably floating on the ocean currents or dried up on a piece of drifting wood, totally unbothered. They had already survived worse. Then came the big one. The one everyone knows. The Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, 66 million years ago. A rock the size of Mount Everest slammed into Mexico. The impact released more energy than billions of atomic bombs. It sent a wall of fire across North America and kicked up enough dust to block out the sun for years. Plants died. Then the herbivores died. Then the carnivores died. The non-avian dinosaurs were wiped off the face of the earth. If you were a Triceratops, you had a very bad day. You were either vaporized instantly or starved to death in the nuclear winter that followed. But here is where it gets messy for the extinction event. The asteroid was having a bad day too, because it couldn't kill the tardigrade. Why? Because the tardigrade doesn't play by the rules of biology we understand. We already mentioned the ton state, but let's look at the mechanics, because they are frankly ridiculous. When a tardigrade enters this state of cryptobiosis, it becomes virtually indestructible. We aren't just talking about surviving a little bit of cold. I mean, they can survive pressure that is 6 times higher than the bottom of the deepest ocean. They can survive radiation doses that are hundreds of times higher than the lethal dose for a human. When the asteroid hit, the radiation and the shock wave would have killed almost everything on the surface. But a tardigrade in a ton state, it's basically a microscopic stone. You can't kill a stone with radiation. There is a fascinating scholarly debate happening right now about the genetic steel that makes this possible. Some scientists have found that tardigrades have a huge chunk of foreign DNA, genes from bacteria and plants incorporated into their own genome. The theory is called horizontal gene transfer. The idea is that when they rehydrate, their cell walls get leaky and they accidentally absorb DNA from the stuff around them, incorporating it into their own code. It's like if you drank a smoothie and suddenly learned how to photosynthesize. Some researchers argue this is an error in the lab data, but if it's true, the tardigrade is basically Frankenstein's monster, stitched together from the spare parts of everything else that died. But you've been lied to if you think survival means fighting. The dinosaurs fought. They competed for food, they battled for territory, and they evolved massive teeth. And they lost. The tardigrade survived because it opted out of the game entirely. While the mammals were scurrying in burrows and the birds were taking flight to escape the fires, the tardigrade simply paused its existence. It didn't need food because it wasn't metabolizing. It didn't need oxygen. It didn't need warmth. It just waited. It sounds insane, but in a way, the water bear is a time traveler. A single tardigrade can technically live for a few months to a year in its active state. But if it keeps drying out and reviving, it can stretch that lifespan across decades, skipping over the bad parts of history. They essentially Control-Alt-Delete their way through the apocalypse. When the dust settled from the asteroid impact and the sun finally broke through the clouds, the ton absorbed a droplet of dew, swelled up, and a little clawed foot kicked back to life. The dinosaurs were fossils. The water bear was just thirsty. So nature threw ice, fire, poison gas, and asteroids at these things, and they didn't flinch. Naturally, when humans discovered tardigrades in the 18th century, our first instinct was to see if we could kill them. For the last few decades, scientists have been treating water bears like crash test dummies for the apocalypse. We have boiled them at 300 degrees Fahrenheit. We have frozen them to almost absolute zero. That's minus 459 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature where atoms literally stop moving and physics essentially gives up and goes home. Most life turns into an ice sculpture at that point. The tardigrade just waits for things to thaw out. Then things got really crazy. In 2007, researchers strapped a bunch of dried-up tardigrades to the outside of a rocket, the Photon M3 mission, and shot them into low Earth orbit. For 10 days, they were exposed to the hard vacuum of space. To put that level of destruction into perspective, if you were thrown out of an airlock without a suit, the lack of pressure would boil your blood, and the cosmic radiation would shred your DNA like a document destroyer. The tardigrades took the full force of the sun's UV radiation, which is about 1,000 times stronger than what you get at the beach. When they came back to Earth, scientists added water. They didn't just wake up, they laid eggs, and the babies were healthy. This brings us to the survivor in question compared to the other tough guys of the animal kingdom. You always hear about how cockroaches will inherit the Earth after a nuclear war. That is total nonsense. A cockroach dies at about 10,000 rads of radiation. A tardigrade can tank up to 600,000 rads. They are the only animal that can repair their own DNA faster than radiation can destroy it. They have a unique protein, literally named DSUP, short for damage suppressor, that wraps around their DNA like a roll of bubble wrap. Historians and astrobiologists still argue whether this ability implies something even wilder: panspermia. The theory is that life didn't start on Earth, but hitchhiked here on a meteor. Since tardigrades can survive the vacuum of space and the impact of a crash, tests show they can survive impacts at 1,800 miles per hour. Some argue they are the perfect candidates for interstellar travelers. Did they come from Mars? Probably not, but they are currently the only Earthlings capable of making the trip without a spaceship. But you've been lied to about what invincible actually means. We see these stats: surviving supernovas, crushing pressures, asteroid impacts, and we imagine the tardigrade is an armoured tank walking through a battlefield. We imagine them as the apex of evolution. Here is the humiliating reality. You can kill a tardigrade with your pinky finger. In fact, you probably stepped on a few thousand of them walking to your car this morning. While they are indestructible against physics, they are laughably weak against biology. They have no hard shell. They have no claws to fight back with. In the microscopic world, they are basically slow-moving sausages. Snails eat them by the dozen. Other predatory worms just slurp them up. Even other tardigrades eat tardigrades. This is the great paradox of the water bear. If you nuke the planet, they survive. If you poke them with a sharp needle, they pop. They evolved to survive the end of the world, but they forgot to evolve a way to survive a garden snail. It's like building a bunker that can withstand a nuclear blast, but doesn't have a lock on the front door. This brings us to right now, the present day, the Holocene, or as many scientists are starting to call it, the Anthropocene. We are currently living through the 6th mass extinction, but this time it's not volcanoes or space rocks. It's us. We are the asteroid. We are changing the climate, acidifying the oceans, and paving over habitats. Species are disappearing at a rate 100 to 1,000 times faster than the background rate. Rhinos, tigers, and coral reefs are blinking out of existence. And the tardigrades? They are doing just fine, thanks for asking. They are living in the moss on your roof, in the cracks of the sidewalk, and even in the parking lot of the nuclear power plant. While we panic about rising temperatures, they are just waiting for the next phase. But geology has one final card to play, and it's the ultimate trump card. In about 5 billion years, our sun will run out of hydrogen fuel. It will destabilize and expand into a red giant. It will swallow Mercury and Venus, and it will scorch the Earth. The oceans won't just get hot, they will boil off into space entirely. The atmosphere will be stripped away. Scholarly models predict that long before the sun actually eats the planet, Earth will become completely sterilized. Life as we know it will be impossible. Here's the thing though, the tardigrade will likely be the last Earthling standing. A recent study by Oxford University looked at the astrophysical probabilities of life surviving until the sun dies. They concluded that while humans are fragile, one large asteroid or a nearby supernova could wipe us out tomorrow. The tardigrade is practically eternal. As long as the sun doesn't literally engulf the planet, they will persist. When the oceans boil away for the last time, the tardigrades will curl up into their tons one final time. They will sit there on the scorching, barren rock that used to be a blue planet, waiting for water that will never return. They will be the silent witnesses to the end of the story. If there is a lesson here, it's that we have completely misunderstood the goal of the game. We think evolution is about becoming smart, building cities, and going to the moon. We think it's about dominance. But nature doesn't care about dominance. Nature only cares about persistence. The T-Rex was dominant. The trilobite was dominant. We are dominant. But the humble microscopic water bear, it realized 500 million years ago that the best way to win the game isn't to be the strongest player on the board. The best way to win is to simply refuse to leave the table. So the next time you feel small or insignificant, just remember, you share a planet with a creature that can eat radiation for breakfast and sleep through the apocalypse. We are just temporary guests in their world. Subscribe if you want to survive the next epoch.